So I am actually going to record this video in case there are any classmates that are not able to make one of the meeting times. Is it okay with both of you if I record?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, thank you. So today, the purpose of our meeting is, first of all, just to do some brief introductions, and second, to go over some really important resources that are out there that have some alternative definitions for gifted and talented. I am going to pause this recording during our introductions just so you guys are not blasted to the class, but I'm going to record my own introduction. My name is Ashley. I'm the professor in your guys' class. I am professionally both an adjunct at Drake, so I teach the Introduction to Gifted and Talented class that you are currently in during the fall and J-term. I also have taught the practicum class in the past and help with the ITAG for credit class. And I also am finishing up my last 2 semesters at Iowa State, getting my PhD in STEM and mathematics education, where I also focus on human growth and development with early childhood. So I have a lot of balls in the air professionally. I also teach a mathematics methods class, as well as own a company that does STEM activities with little kids, both as like birthday party kind of stuff, but mostly I present to faculty, to teachers to try to convince them to incorporate STEM activities into the elementary classroom. Personally, I have 3 little girls. I have a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, and an 8-year-old that keep us very busy. My husband is also in education. He is a PE and health teacher in Ankeny. And I was also a teacher prior to pursuing my PhD and teaching at the university level. And now I am on the job market looking for a professorship somewhere. So that's a little bit about our crazy life. And I love to cook and eat. And I love to, my husband and I do triathlons. That doesn't make me an athlete. That just makes me like okay at swimming and okay at biking and okay at running, but I can't do any of them to the extreme on their own. But I really do enjoy athletic events, even though like I'm never even like close to first, but I'm always not last. So that's always my goal. Finish and don't be last. And then if I've done that, I count it as a win. So I'm going to pause the video now so that you guys can introduce yourself, and then I'll start us back up in just a second.
Okay.
Okay, so we're back. I am going to spend the next 10 minutes talking about some really important resources in gifted education and some pretty significant changes that have come to fruition in the last 3 years that do directly impact you. To do so, I'm going to share my screen with you. Prior to doing so, I want you to know that if you have any questions at any time, please interrupt me. Or if I say something that you're not sure what it is, please interrupt me. In the effort of honoring your time, I'm going to talk very quickly with the understanding that if you see something that is of significance to you in your position, that you go back and you look at it on your own. Okay, so feel free to interrupt me. I'm sorry, I did not hear you. Go ahead.
Will this be in like a document, like the resources be written somewhere, or is this something we should be writing down?
No, don't do that. This, I will send out all of the websites in an announcement once everybody's Zoom sessions are done. Good question.
Sure.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen with you. And I always know when the screen share starts because all of your faces get a big flash of white light. So I'm going to actually start your assignment for this Zoom session, this meeting, is to actually look through this document. It is linked in the content folder for this second module. So you don't need to write down this website or anything. I just wanted to point out that this is the document that you will be using for your follow-up assignment, okay? So I'm gonna actually start here by looking at the National Association for Gifted Children. This is the primary national organization for teachers of gifted students. One thing that I want to point out is the order of the language in this association. A lot of times you'll say, well, I'm the gifted teacher. No, you're the teacher of gifted. Your students are individuals. And so that'd be kind of like saying, I'm the student teacher. No, you're the teacher of students. It's the same thing. Okay, so this is the National Association for Gifted Children. Okay, one thing that's really important about NAGC is that they have an enormous number of resources that are available for you to print free of charge. One in particular that I like to share is when you come over to this professional, oops, hold on. My screen just froze, so give me just a hot second. Okay, when you go to the About NAGC tab, this is great. There's wonderful things there. But what I really want you to look at is these resources tabs. When you look over at this administrator tab, there is something called an administrator toolbox right here. This is huge because teachers, a lot of times we speak about serving children in the frame of what that looks like in our classrooms. Not how administrators think. Administrators think about programming and how it affects their ability of the school to follow accreditation and state policy, because that is their job. Their job is not only to make sure that teachers are doing their jobs as like an HR person and a leader, but it's also to make sure that they are following law. So one thing that's really nice about this administrator toolbox is that it gives you very succinct talking points about why gifted and talented services are important and how it may affect your administrator. So if your administrator has questions for you, you can give this to them. It's one paragraph. It's done and over with. The other thing that I have seen, teachers do is make little index cards or little like printouts of this and put them in places that faculty members frequently visit, like the teacher's lounge, the back door of bathrooms, so that your classroom teachers are actually informed about why you're doing what you're doing and what the purpose of gifted and talented programming is. So you can use this in a lot of different ways, but what I'm really trying to point out here is that this information tab under educators and administrators is huge. The other thing about the information tab is you may have a lot of parents that they have never had experience in gifted and talented, and they start asking you questions like, well, how do I address their perfectionism? My son's really bored in class. What sort of resources could I provide him so that he is not getting in trouble when he's bored? I am not sure what everybody's family orientation is, but when I started teaching, I did not have children for 10 years while I started teaching. So parents would ask me for advice, and I thought to myself, yep, I still call my mom for advice like that, right? Like I didn't know what to say. I didn't know where to turn. So this is a great tab. If you yourself are not a parent of gifted children, if you yourself have not gone through gifted and talented education and you're not exactly sure how to answer a parent's question, this is a really great location for you to send some resources to those parents. NAGC has, every state has their own NAGC subgroup. Iowa's is called the Iowa Talented and Gifted Association, or ITAG. And I saw a couple of you over at the ITAG conference today, so that was super fun to see Lindsay and some other folks. But I just wanted to point out that ITAG's website has a lot of resources that are available to us locally. They bring in quite a few speakers. There's obviously the annual conference. If you are a member of ITAG, they send out a monthly newsletter that has lots of information about contests that are coming up that you may think that your students could benefit from. There are articles about what's happening in communities and in other programs. They do highlights of what's happening in other programs in the area. They also have a mentorship program. So if you do end up pursuing your gifted and talented endorsement and you get a position and you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, I wish I had someone to talk to on a regular basis. They do have a mentorship program that both Dr. Beiser and I participate in, where first and second year teachers are partnered with a veteran teacher and can just ask questions and bounce ideas off of. Think of this as the person where, you know, you're in your first year of teaching and you don't know where the copy machine is, right? Or the copy machine jams and you don't know how to fix it, right? There's all those little like learning curves as a first year teacher that when you change positions and roles, you undergo all of those new learning curves all over again. The difference of being a gifted and talented teacher is that you're usually on your own. There's not usually someone else in your building that does your job. And so a lot of times you don't have a sounding board. You don't have someone to meet with. So if you ever are in that position or you are a new teacher of gifted, that's a great program to join. The next resource I'm going to show you is actually not a resource that I think that you need to regularly visit. But I'm going here because I want to talk a little bit about the national state of gifted. Your assignment focuses on the Iowa state of gifted and talented education. So the Davidson Institute is a school where highly gifted individuals can actually be highly accelerated. Think kids that are 10, 11, 12, graduating high school, finishing college at 14, 15, and then finishing their master's degree at 18. So we have some really significantly advanced children. They actually live on campus. The University of Iowa also has a similar institute. It's called the Bellin and Blank Center. So we're very unusual to have something in our state that is such a resource to our students and our teachers. But one thing that I want to point out to you is that you'll notice that this particular graphic that is on the screen talks about gifted and talented mandates and funding. Gifted and talented education is not a federally mandated program. That also means it is not a federally funded program. So gifted and talented education varies state by state. All of the funding comes from the state level, as does all of the laws and regulations that they have to follow, except for a few that I'm going to talk about in just a second that come from the federal level. So Iowa is one of only 4 states in the United States that both fully mandates, in other words, providing gifted services, identification, those are all a part of our state code. They are law. And it is fully funded. So the funding that is provided for districts to implement gifted and talented education is also a part of our law. The funding is supplementary funding, which means that it can only be used for gifted and talented services. If it is offered to the general school population, it is a misuse of funds. So you can't use gifted and talented funds to pay an AP teacher, for an example, because AP classes are offered to all students. Now, if you are offering an AP class because you have a gifted student and you happen to be a highly qualified teacher in that particular area, you can offer that and be paid for it. The funds can also not be paid for administrators. Okay, so if you have a counselor, for an example, in your building, they can't be paid for gifted and talented services unless they are only working with gifted and talented students across your district. So the other thing that's interesting about this is that recently there have been a number of states, as funding streams have changed, that have basically just redlined gifted and talented programming from their state codes, which means it's no longer mandated, nor is it funded. Great example of this is Illinois. So Illinois previously redlined all of their gifted and talented programming. However, there was an outroar about it. So they put all of the mandates for programming back in their code, but they still redlined the funding. So now these states have to fully provide services, but do not give any funding to school districts to provide those services. So essentially the school districts just have to figure out where those monies are going to come from. The largest group of states are states that mandate gifted and talented programming. The state pays part of that funding, and then the school district is required for the rest of it. A lot of these states have things where there is a gifted and talented coordinator or an instructional coach specifically for gifted and talented, and they work with classroom teachers in order to provide services because that's what the funding pays for. It pays for one person for the whole district. But they all vary. One thing that I want you to know, though, is that this has changed a little bit in the last 3 years. So I'm not actually sure why this is in air, but apparently the video is aired out right now. I know it doesn't usually. For about 5 to 7 years, we actually did not have current education policy on the books for the federal government. The No Child Left Behind Act, or NCLB, had lapsed, and it had not been renewed. And they tried and tried and tried. Congress tried and tried to get it passed, but they could not get it passed. And so eventually what was passed bipartisanly was called the Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, or ESSA. That's all the same thing. It just kind of matters what part of the country you're in about what you call it. But Every Student Succeeds Act overtook No Child Left Behind. And what's significant about ESSA is that it, for the first time, has federal language specific to gifted and talented students. More specifically, it keeps the Javits Grant, which funds research about gifted and talented students, and it requires states to report out about the growth and achievement levels of their highly achieving populations, or their gifted populations. So for an example, what we know in gifted education is a lot of times you will have a kid at the 99th percentile, and the next year he's still at the 99th percentile, but he was so high in the 99th percentile in 3rd grade that when he's at the 99th percentile in 4th grade, he didn't actually grow. Okay, so that 99th percentile is any 2 or more standard deviations away, or 3 or more standard deviations away from the mean. So if that kid in 3rd grade was 6 standard deviations from the mean, now he's only 3 standard deviations from the mean. He's still at the 99th percentile. Now school districts have to report out, and states have to report out about the growth and achievement levels of their highly proficient population. So parents and school districts can see if their high achieving students are or are not growing. So instead of just, yeah, you're high achieving, thumbs up, buttercup, it's actually, are you growing? Are we serving you? And if you are not growing, if that child is stagnant, we need to provide some sort of services for that child so that they are actually learning and growing in our school systems. So it becomes a point of advocacy for us. Hey, we don't have enough for these kids. Hey, we're not doing enough. They're not growing. The other thing about ESSA that you should know is, oops, I don't know what I actually did. The other thing about ESSA that you need to know is the legislation also asks for, it also asks districts to determine whether or not they want to use Title I funding for gifted and talented students. So previously, Title I funding has been allocated to students who are struggling in school. Now, ESSA allows Title I funding to be used for any special student population. So it does give kind of a roundabout funding stream for gifted and talented education. And then the other thing that I was going to show you here is there is a great NAGC Q&A 2-page document about how gifted and talented is affected by ESSA. I would also say this is a fabulous document to share with your administrator or your superintendent, depending on how big or small your district is. It's also great food for thought for you as future teachers of gifted. There are lots of significant nuggets of knowledge that are in here, and it gives you lots of points of advocacy when you're trying to pull something out of your hat. Okay, so going back, that's kind of the state of the union of gifted and talented. The state of the state, we talked a little bit about Iowa. What I want you to dive into is, because gifted and talented education is a state-by-state basis, I want you to look into this document and the different definitions of gifted and talented, how they're related to the definitions that you've already read in your textbook, and talk a little bit about how each of these definitions does or does not fit into your own personal beliefs and your own perspectives of what gifted means and what gifted looks like. Okay, so again, there are specific instructions within Module 2, but I wanted to make sure that you saw that document. Any questions?
No.
Big question. Just for me, coming from a different situation, being at a private school. Sorry, did mine cut out for a second?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, sorry. It keeps freezing down here. But coming from a private school, what of those things do apply to me and what doesn't? You know what I mean?
Yep, I sure do. So the, excuse me, these are federally regulated code. So they would be things that apply to you. The funding stream obviously does not. But just like you guys have to be accountable to students at risk and special education students, these would be the same kind of codes that you guys would have to be responsible for.
Okay, sure. No, that makes sense.
Okay. Anything else?
No, it was really informational though. I'm
Tried to
glad that Iowa was up there at the very top.
Well, and I think you'll be interested to see, once you guys start reading the different definitions from different states, I think you will see how the definition that Iowa has really does drive why we both are funded and mandated.
I had already kind of looked at that previously just to kind of somewhat maybe know what we were going to talk about. So, but yeah. Cool.
Awesome. All right. Well, if you have any questions, don't hesitate reaching out to me. I will be traveling tomorrow, so I won't be as available as I typically am, but I will try to respond as soon as I can if you guys have any questions.
Perfect.
Sounds good.
Right.
Thank you.
Yep. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.